All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com. It's our latest Portals community call hosted by Nick Haydock of Engineered Code. Hey, Nick, welcome.
That's what happens when you're on mute, right? It's something I
Yes,
know
we hear you now.
with all the meetings happening online now. That's a constant. I think you're on mute, so I'm guilty of that right there. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you back. I believe this is our third of these, and they seem to be working out really well. Obviously, this time that we're meeting comes at a really unique and different time with COVID-19 really everywhere at this point, and such a heavy emphasis on working remotely and digital communication between all the different kinds of groups and individuals and organizations that we see now. I really don't see how we could start this call any other way than talking a little about Portals and its role, because I mean that was one of the types of solutions that came first to my mind as something that really could see greater interest and greater importance given what everyone is going through and what so many organizations are going through. Can you just talk a little bit about what your thoughts have been around that and maybe some of the things you've been seeing?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, I hope everyone is doing well and their family is safe. And strongly encourage everyone, if you're not doing your social distancing, get that done. I've got lots of people in my family in the healthcare sector, so they're going to be on the front lines. And I'm lucky to be, working in my basement and protected from some of it at this point. But really encourage everyone to take every possible precaution to keep safe. But yeah, in terms of the technology side of things, yeah, certainly the portals is, it's your way of engaging with all these audiences that are outside of organizations. Sometimes audiences within your organization, but maybe don't have access to CDS or Dynamics. So we've really seen a big need for portals over the last couple of weeks. We've been working on projects that are specific to the pandemic because there's just, there's these vast audiences that do need that you need to stay in touch with, and a portal is a great technology for that.
Any sense of whether the interest is in things that are sort of emergency and temporary, or whether people are still thinking sort of along the lines of long-term plans?
Yeah, we're seeing an uptick in both. I think that I think portals is something that every organization, if they don't have, they kind of wish they did. So whether it's an emergency situation like we've seen a few of, but just in general, I think it's something where if you're not dealing with an emergency right now, you may have some of your other priorities may not be on your plate anymore. So it's an opportunity, to kind of get one of those items on your bucket list off. So the last couple of weeks, we've been receiving a lot of calls about getting help with portals.
All right. Well, a couple of other just notes for the audience here. We certainly welcome your comments and your questions today. Look for the questions block in the webcast interface and enter them at any time. I know Nick will be making time for those as he sort of moves through the rest of his presentation here, whether it's about it's about COVID-19 or other portals related topics. I also see Paul, it looks like you are online. Paul Fuchs from Engineering Code.
I am.
Make sure we can hear you. Hey, welcome. Great to have you here, and good to know we can hear you. We're recording today's event, everyone, so we'll be providing a copy of that as a follow-up, along with any other materials Nick and Paul want to share. And I think that's about all I had for starting things off. So Nick, why don't I hand it off to you to sort of take it from here?
Sounds good. I'm assuming people can see my screen here.
Yep.
So I'll just get started here. Just a quick introduction. If you don't know who I am, my name is Nicholas Haydock. I am the president and a software engineer with Engineered Code Consulting, Inc. I am a licensed professional engineer and a Microsoft MVP for my contributions with Power Apps portals specifically. And I've been doing this for quite a long time. I've got 10 years plus experience with Power Apps portals. My career began at ADX Studio, And if you don't know what that means, I'll be explaining kind of what that means here in a little bit when I get into the histories of the platform. If you ever want to get in touch with me, my social media feed is there. Twitter, LinkedIn, blog, YouTube, all those types of things. So feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk portals. So please do that. Again, just shout out to the good folks over at MS Dynamics Worlds, and specifically Jason. They help me get the word out. They get me this GoToWebinar software. They help me moderate the call, all that sort of stuff. So it was really, I sent him an email back in January saying, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. You want to get involved? And he jumped on and has been great throughout the whole process. So really appreciate his support and helping us get the word out to the community about Power Apps portals. So what I plan on covering today, kind of our standard agenda. We'll go through some portals news. We'll then kind of deep dive into today's featured topic, which is a guide to getting started with Power Apps portals. Then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers. And then we'll kind of finish with the date and time of the next portals community call. So in terms of portals news, not really much, from Microsoft specifically. The big news over the last couple months were the new features, that sort of thing. We've covered all of that. So just in the news section here, I've got a couple of community contributions that I want to highlight. So the first one would be that there is a new online course from fellow MVP Nick Dolman. I believe it's pretty much, think of it as like Power Apps portals in a day. And at a very, very attractive price point. So I believe it's all online there. You can see the link if you want to go check it out. So if there's anyone in the world who knows his stuff on portals, it's Nick Dolman. So if you want more details and are looking for some structured training on portals, highly encourage you to check out the Power Apps Portals Fundamental course that Mr. Dolman has available. Second, there was a blog post from another MVP, Colin Vermander. So what he did is he put out a post of improvements for web forms. And so if you've seen any of my YouTube videos recently, you'll know that I've been spending the last couple of months, I think it is, looking at web forms. Kind of giving all the ins and outs of some of the capabilities of web forms. And what Colin has done in his post is he's kind of looked at, where are there some areas for improvement in web forms? It's honestly a technology that hasn't seen a lot of love recently. So, but it is a very powerful feature. So I strongly encourage you, if you have any interest in web forms, check out Colin's blog. Check out the ideas that he's published on the ideas site and vote for them if there's any ones that you think would be worthwhile of Microsoft's effort to get going there. So definitely recommend checking out that blog post. So, and yeah, like I said, that pretty much covers it for the news section this month. And so that means we will proceed to our main topic of the day, which is Power Apps Portals, a guide to getting started. So really what I wanted to do here is kind of give, for someone who's maybe familiar with the Power Platform, maybe Dynamics, but doesn't know Power Apps Portals, I kind of want to give in as much as we can in about 30 minutes here, just say, okay, here's what Power Apps Portals are, very basic introduction. This will assume some sort of basic familiarity with Power Platform, model-driven Power Apps, Dynamics, that sort of stuff. But the idea here is that if you're new to the portals, this should hopefully kind of get you started and give you an intro to what this technology is. So I guess what we'll start off with is what are Power Apps portals? So the first thing is, and this is relatively recent news, but so Power Apps portals are actually one of the three main types of Power Apps alongside Canvas and model-driven apps. What Power Apps portals is they are web portals built on top of the Common Data Service so CDS, so that's how I'll kind of refer to it. So they're web portals built on top of CDS that really anyone can access through a browser. So you don't need a special app or anything. They're web-based, essentially web-based Power Apps, and they allow for both anonymous and authenticated access. So that's kind of a little bit, that's different from the other two types of Power Apps. So Canvas and model driven would typically require that you log in. So you can create an anonymous view of your CDS data using Power Apps portals. But the other key thing is that they allow you to give external access to your CDS data. So when you log into a Power Apps portal, you don't need to be a member at the organization that owns the portal. So you can enable other authentication mechanisms like Twitter and Facebook and that sort of thing. So usually the main purpose of a portal is to give access to data in CDS to people who are not specifically licensed for that CDS. So they're not, Dynamics users or not your CDS users. You want to give them a different interface, and that's where web portals or the Power Apps portals comes in. So just a little bit of history on where this technology came from. So about 2009, which is when I started with ADX Studio, ADX Studio introduced the ADX Studio Portals product, which is essentially what this product has evolved into. In 2015, Microsoft acquired ADX Studio, and then a few months later, May 2016, Microsoft released their own their first version of what were then at the time known as Dynamics 365 portals. They were also known as the portal capabilities for Dynamics 365. There's been a few different names over the years, but essentially it started off as ADX Studio portals. They were acquired by Microsoft. They were then rebranded to Dynamics 365 portals. And the key thing to know about is that when Microsoft acquired the technology, they turned it into a software as a service offering. So rather than providing you with the code that you host yourself, the portal is now hosted by Microsoft. In the fall of 2019, Microsoft announced what was essentially a name change. So rather than being Dynamics 365 portals, it is now known as Power Apps portals. And the reason for that is what they did is they removed all the dependencies on Dynamics. So now you can install a Power Apps portal on what we call a naked CDS instance, or a CDS instance that has no Dynamics 365 first-party apps like sales or customer service installed on it. So from a technical standpoint, what they had to do is literally the solutions that were used to build this application had dependencies on things like the case entity. So they had to go through and they removed those dependencies and created solutions that could be installed on a base CDS instance. Once they did that, that's what became Power Apps portals. Now, I almost hate to mention it in case people think that this is a good path to be going down right now, but just so that you are aware, in the fall of 2017, Microsoft did provide a one-time release of the source code. That was known as Adoxio, which was the company that got spun out of ADX Studio, they then took that code and put it on GitHub and called it the XRM Portals Community Edition. Now the main purpose of that code was to offer people the ability to transition to the online environment or to help out on-premise customers, because the new Microsoft offering Power Apps Portals is not available on-premise. So it's basically like the next version of ADX Studio Portals. The thing is that it's completely unsupported by Microsoft, and we now know that there will be significant breaking changes in April 2022 when Microsoft removes the WS Trust authentication options. The code as it is will fail quite well. It will be in a non-functioning state. Not saying that you couldn't go in there and possibly change the code, but the code as it is today won't work past that date with Dynamics 365 and online. So just be aware of that. Again, it exists, but strongly encourage you to find an alternative option than trying to leverage the open source option. And then again, I think it's worth pointing out kind of the comparisons between Power Apps portals and Dynamics 365 portals. This question still comes up. People say, well, which one should I use? The good news is you don't have a choice. They are the same thing. So at this point, if you install a new one, it's a Power Apps portals, it's a Dynamics 365 portals, depending on which template you use. You can essentially use the terms somewhat interchangeably. You don't have to pick between the two. We'll get into the templates here in just a second, but really they're the same thing. So there's no choice to be made. All right. So I just for the techies out there, I do want to just kind of give you a high level overview of what the actual architecture looks like. So a Power Apps portal is an Azure web application that is hosted by Microsoft that uses the same CRM SDK that all the rest of us know and love and have access to access the CDS data. So keep in mind that Power Apps portals was started by an ISV that didn't have any special rights to data any more than the rest of us. So it is using kind of the standard CRM SDK to get at the data. And the other thing to note is that it does heavily rely on caching for performance. So you can see in that picture there, the user accesses the portal. The portal queries CDS, but it does through its cache. So that you may run into cases where if you change data in your CDS environment directly, say through a model-driven app or through an integration through the SDK, the portal may not immediately refresh that cache. So it's just something that you need to be aware of. And it's the reason why the podcast for Power Apps portals is named Refresh the Cache, because there was a time where that was a huge pain. It is much less of a pain these days. So.
Hey, Nick.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. We have just step back a second. We have a question from S.E. Mosby. Is internal authorization still available?
So I'll be talking about authentication here in just a minute. So if that question doesn't get answered at that point, we'll get that person to re-ask their question. But I believe I'll be talking about that when I get to authentication.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so now let's talk about the templates that are available. So you can think of the templates as they are essentially their starter data and some solutions that are imported into your CDS database during the installation of your portal. So this includes things like web pages, forms, and lists, which are set up and kind of essentially pre-configured by Microsoft to address specific business needs. So there are currently 5 portal templates. So there's the starter template, which is, that's really what people think of as Power Apps portals. If you are creating a portal in a CDS database, the only template you have available to you is the starter template. And it includes kind of just the basic capabilities like authentication and profile management. As you can see, the other 4 templates all require and have dependencies on Dynamics 365. There is the customer self-service portal and the employee self-service portal, which themselves have almost identical functionality. The main difference is how do you log in. For employee self-service, people are traditionally log in with Azure AD, and with customer self-service, they're traditionally logging in using things like Twitter and Facebook and those types of things. But the features that you get out of those portal templates are things like help desk, knowledge base, and discussion forums. So if you think of things like knowledge base and help desk, which is based on cases, that functionality is built on top of the case entity and the knowledge article entity that exists in Dynamics 365 customer service. So that's why without those records or those entities being installed, those portals wouldn't work. So that's why you still need to have Dynamics to get access to some of those templates. The community template is basically an extension of the customer self-service template. In addition to help desk and knowledge base and discussion forums, it gives you blog functionality and ideas. And then the partner portal, it has the functionality of help desk and knowledge base and forums, but it also gives you opportunity, account, and contact management. Essentially, it's a deal registration portal for your partners. So again, those are the starter templates, or those are the templates that Microsoft gives you. When you install one of these templates, that data is copied into your CDS database. But it's also important to keep in mind that that's kind of a one-time thing. If Microsoft releases future updates for the customer self-service portal, you won't get those automatically because that's data in your environment that you may have changed. So it would be very difficult for Microsoft to attempt to apply certain updates to your data. So it's kind of a one-time starter snapshot of what you get, and then you kind of maintain it going forward. So those are the templates. Let's talk about how do we actually get one of these installed. So these are added through what people call the maker experience, which is available at make.powerapps.com. So I'll show you a quick little demo of this here in just a second. But it's important to note that when you install a portal, you actually get two apps. You get the portal itself, which is an app, and you also get a model-driven app, which you can use for the administration of the portal. So I'm just going to bring up the screen here. Here we go. So you can see I'm in make.powerapps.com. And if I wanted to create a new portal, all I would do is I would create my new, whether it's a CDS environment or a Dynamics environment. And you'll see right here, we've got portal from blank. So portal from blank, your portal from blank is your starter template. So if I were to click that, then I'm just asked for a name of the portal, the URL that I want. So it would be whatever.powerappsportals.com. And then I click create, and that would get me to the state that I'm in all right now. You can see that I've already created one, so I'm seeing a limit here on the number of portals I can create per environment. But that's kind of how simple it is. Give it a name, give it a URL, click create, come back 5-10 minutes later, and everything's all ready for you to go. Now, if you were wanting to install one of the other templates, you could click on all templates, and you'll see a list here of a bunch of different templates, whether they're Canvas apps. Now, I'm not seeing those other options in here because my environment that I'm looking at is just a naked CDS environment. If I had Dynamics installed, I would see in this list, I would see customer portal, I would see partner portal, I would see employee service, self-service portal, and I would see the community portal. So that's where you would go, just look in these templates, and you'll find those other portals in there as well. If I just go back to my home, again, just pointing out the fact that here are the two apps that are created when I install my portal. So this is the portal itself. If I click on it, it will take me over to my actual Power Apps portal that I have here, which is this. And I've got my model-driven app, which if I click on here, will open up a unified interface model-driven app. Oh, no, I guess I can't. Middle click on that, and that will bring up a model-driven app where I can manage all the aspects of my portal. All right. So I see a question here, how many portals can we have per instance or environment? So right now you are allowed one portal per template in your environment. So if you have a naked CDS environment, that means you can have one because you can only install one starter portal or one portal from blank. In a Dynamics environment, you could have up to 5, I'm guessing. That's something that they're definitely working on changing the way that works. It has to do with how the data, how the template gets installed to begin with. But right now, the limit is kind of one per template type. All right, so you can see that the installation process, if you've been around with portals for a while, it used to be you go into this crazy other area and it was a bunch of steps. It's now very, very much simplified as part of this kind of move to being Power Apps portals. So great work by Microsoft on that front. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over and I'm going to talk about authentication. So authentication, the big thing that kind of trips people up at the very beginning with portals is that all the people who log into your portal are contacts. They are not system users like you would see in CDS. And this is true even if you're using employee self-service. It doesn't matter who's logging into a portal, they must be contacts in your system. So once they get to the point where you want someone to log in, the question is, well, what do they actually put in? Do they type in a username and password? Are they logging in with other identity providers? So the good news is that Portals is pretty flexible in that regard. And I think this will address the question that we had earlier. So there is what's known as local authentication. The local authentication means that the username and the hashed password is actually stored directly in CDS. So the person's username and password are stored as fields on the contact record. This has been deprecated. Now, it's still there, it still works, but Microsoft would really, really like it if you used something else. Eventually it will go away, and we'll talk about why in just a few minutes here. But local authentication exists, but it is recommended to use something other than the local authentication. I'll be the first to admit, we use it all the time for demo purposes. It's nice, it's quick, it's easy, but we no longer consider it viable for any actual real client implementations. We will always use something other than local login. Now, aside from local login, there's what's called external login. So external login is when you rely on someone else to handle the management of the usernames and passwords. So this is where we talk about, is it Twitter, is it Facebook, is it a Microsoft account, is it a Google account, all those different options. Those are all considered to be part of the external group of options. So the portal supports 4 different protocols for authentication providers. It supports OpenID Connect. It supports OAuth 2. Just know that with OAuth 2, there's a specific list of approved providers that you must use. So it's not just any OAuth 2, it's a specific list. WS Federation and SAML. So those 4 types of, those 4 protocols are supported by the portal. So if you have an authentication provider that you want to use on your portal, and it's OpenID Connect compliant, you can use that for authentication on your portal. So like I said, so those are all options. What's recommended? What's recommended is to use Azure AD B2C. So if you're not familiar, Azure AD B2C is Microsoft's solution for authentication that allows people to log in to a whole bunch of different things. So it in itself supports Facebook and Twitter and all those other providers. It does all that work to make sure it's compliant with all the different protocols, all that sort of stuff. So what Microsoft would like you to do is you configure a single identity provider on your portal, which is Azure AD B2C, which is just configured like any other OpenID Connect provider. So you configure that single ID or use that single authentication provider on your portal, which is Azure AD B2C, and you delegate all the rest of it to Azure AD B2C. Then you can go into Azure AD B2C and say, hey, yeah, I want Twitter, I want Facebook, I even want local authentication. So Azure AD B2C itself has local authentication where people can provide their own usernames and passwords, which doesn't get stored in CDS. So the reason that at least the reason I think that Microsoft wants you to go down this road is Microsoft has a team that's building out products that allow you to log into websites using all those different providers, and that's the Azure AD B2C team. They I think they want to move that off of the Power Apps Portals team and just say, hey, we work with Azure AD B2C. That's giving you all the options. That's the team that's working on this. That's their day job. Let us build the other stuff that you need, and let someone else focus on the authentication. So that's why we recommend Azure AD B2C as much as possible. Or if you're doing a custom solution, then do OpenID Connect and integrate that directly with Portal. But try to avoid configuring a bunch of different identity providers within portals and use other services. Now, if you're interested in authentication, our call last month was actually it was all about authentication. So check out the YouTube video for a kind of a much longer-winded answer to that. Now I see I have a few questions in here. So it says, so even when using Azure AD login, external login, the contact record gets created? Yes. If we mess around with the contact record created for the Azure AD, does this affect the Azure AD's user login? No, you can mess around with that login. Or, I mean, I guess depends on how you define mess around. But the way that the information is stored is there's actually a separate record called external identity where the details of that are stored. So you can definitely add custom fields to the contact. You can change stuff. Just don't play around. There's some specific any of the ADX underscore attributes on there, I would kind of leave to their own. And then it's the external identities where it's keeping track of which Azure AD record is associated to that. So you can still treat it like it's a regular contact, just don't mess around with the external identity. Oh, it looks like we got, okay, well, so Nikita's going into the technical bits. So since Nikita is sharing, I'll explain a little bit why you can only have one template in a portal, one portal per template. And the reason is that when Microsoft imports the data, all the GUIDs for all the IDs of the records are hard coded. So if you were then to try and import another one of the, say, starter portal, you'd be attempting to import another another set of records with all the same IDs, and that's obviously a problem. So not saying that you can't get around it. If you went in there and then changed all those GUIDs, or there are ways around it, but it's a little ugly, and I know that they're working on getting that to be a better experience. I haven't found any Microsoft documentation related to deprecating local authentication. So the local authentication deprecation there wasn't an announcement on the page. It's been removed, but I know it's still deprecated. I literally talked to Dilip Singh, who is the program manager for this at Microsoft last week about this, and it is still definitely deprecated. Right now, the best source is probably Colin Vermander has a blog post on it. But I could promise you that it is definitely deprecated. The reason it's still there is that until Azure AD B2C is available in every Azure region, it has to remain there to be an option, because Azure AD B2C isn't available everywhere yet. Once it is, then they will be working on getting it out of there. So that's kind of the holdup, is that Azure AD B2C isn't available quite everywhere yet. And the last one here, so how does the portal differentiate internal employees from external users? That's a very good question. I do have a blog post if you want to see the details about that, but essentially it can tell that you are using an Azure Active Directory ID to log in. So if your identity provider is Azure Active Directory, it can tell that it's in the tenant of that same tenant as your portal. So it uses that to decide whether you're an employee or not. But yeah, if you're interested in that subject, check out my blog post, because there's a bit more details to that. All right, next topic here. So working with, content management, branding. So this is, if you take away anything from this session, I want you to take away the fact that Portals is not an enterprise content management system. It is a tool used to build web applications integrated with CDS. This is not a replacement for Sitecore or Episerver or any of those enterprise CMSs. This product contains basic CMS capabilities to let you do things like create pages, upload files, that sort of thing. But it is not an enterprise content management system that you should be using for your corporate marketing website. That being said, there is a significant investment in what's called Portal Studio, which is the new citizen developer focused editor for Power Apps portals. So, but again, the focus is on building web applications and not content managed websites. And I'll get into a quick demo of this about, how do you get to the studio? How do you create a page? But before I do that, I just want to mention about branding. So, that's usually one of the first things that people do. They look at the portal, they say, the functionality might be what I want, but, I don't like blue. My colors are red. I want my logo, all that sort of stuff. So all of that, can be changed. The overall theme or skin of the site is controlled using a technology called Bootstrap. And just so you're aware, it's Bootstrap version 3. So if you're kind of going out there looking for pre-built themes, you need version 3 themes, not version 4. But what you can do is you can find these pre-built themes and you can add those to your website and basically completely replace the look and feel of your website, replace all the colors to match the branding that you need. So I'm going to jump over here to back to demo. So when I'm in my in make.powerapps.com, if I go to my portal and instead of just clicking on the link, which will open the portal itself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the edit button. The edit button is going to bring me to the Power Apps Portal Studio, as it's known. When we get there, you'll see that we have essentially like a drag and drop editor that should be familiar to anyone who's using the new model-driven app designer or the Canvas app editor. You know, similar look and feel. So if I want to go in here and click this here, and maybe I'm really excited about this, so I click in here and I add 3 more exclamation points. That's all I got to do to change my website. If I say browse website, that's going to open up my site, and I'm able to look at this new site with my change made in there. So you can see all I had to do was go in there and I can easily change content. I can add new pages. I can upload files. For example, if I want to go into here, as I'm editing this page, I can go in here and I can say there's a bunch of different components that I can add. So one type of thing I could add is say an image. Say I want to add an image. I want to upload an image. I can go through the process here of, let's just say that, and I can upload an image through to my portal, and I can do all that through this interface. So again, it's lots of improvements have been, this is a relatively new feature. The studio is, less than a year old. So lots of work is going into that. The key thing to know is that you can't do everything in the studio. And there's lots of cases where you have to go back and use the model-driven app, especially when we talk about entity lists and entity forms. So it's kind of a, it's great for some things. In other cases, you just simply can't do it in here. Microsoft is working on getting as much of the functionality as makes sense into this experience. So every release wave, we're seeing more and more features come into this experience, but not everything is there, and not everything will be there. There'll always be, I think, advanced functionality that will exist in the model-driven app, but the idea is to get the kind of the most common features into this studio experience. If we talk about the theme, there's an option right here where I can actually upload. So if I want to upload my own custom CSS, I could do it that way, or I can just click on these CSS files and I can edit these files here directly as well. So it is possible, if you're familiar with CSS, you can edit all those files directly in here as well. Also of note, what's coming in the next release wave is a simplified theming experience. So you're going to be able to theme your portal a lot quicker and easier than having to go get a portals or a Bootstrap theme. It'll be a lot more, click on colors, that sort of thing, as opposed to editing CSS. So that is one of the enhancements that's coming as part of the next release wave. All right. So I'm just gonna jump back here to my presentation, and we're gonna talk about. Oh wait, I see we've got some questions here. Okay, so I'm a project manager looking to use Power Apps portals for our dynamics quotation functionality for direct customers. We are liaising with web dev agencies for CSS and HTML for Bootstrap. Something that's come up a lot with the web is that is to the semantics of the HTML generated by Power Apps portals. The agency are saying that they're not able to create CSS until they've seen the HTML. Is that correct? Yeah, generally you need to know what the HTML is in order to provide the CSS. That being said, with Bootstrap, the Bootstrap classes are well known, and that's what makes it possible. Essentially, what Bootstrap is a bunch of defined classes that we can use to target certain elements. The challenge is that even with a complete Bootstrap template, more than likely you're going to need additional CSS classes on top of it to get the appropriate effect. So yeah, if a customer approached me and wanted us to help with the CSS, you know, knowing what the HTML looked like would probably be an input to that for sure. All right, I'm gonna jump back to my presentation here. Quick time check. Okay, we're doing okay. So working with CDS data. So this is the power of Power Apps portals. This is, if you ask me, this is why ADX Studio got acquired by Microsoft. This is the real the real goodness of this technology, and that is the technologies known as entity lists, entity forms, web forms, and entity permissions. So what these allow you to do is to expose your CDS data via your portal. Entity lists allow you to expose the views. So I'm going to use the model-driven app terminology here. In a model-driven app, you've got views and you've got forms. So entity lists let you expose your views. Entity forms allow you to expose your forms. Web forms are like multi-step entity forms, and you can actually do multiple entities. So think of it like a wizard where you have multiple steps to go through the process. But again, they're driven off the forms that you create in your model-driven apps. And then entity permissions allow you to decide which records a user gets access to on your portal. So entity permissions are typically about how is my contact that is logged in related to a particular record. So in the case of a help desk, a contact on the portal can see all the cases that it is related to. That's how entity permissions works. It's all about how are records related, as opposed to in CDS, the security model is about who owns the records. In portals, the security model is how am I related to records. So I'll do a quick demo of that just to kind of give you guys a sense of how that looks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first create a new page here, which will be an entity list, which I'll drop an entity list on. Wait for that to load. And so once this is loaded here, I can go into this column, and what I can say is I want to, in the components, you'll see that I have a list. So that's the entity list. If I go in here, I give it a name, demo contact. Now I could use an existing one. If I already have built it out in my model-driven app, I could do it that way, but I can also build them directly here in the Portal Studio. So in here, I'm going to just do an entity list of contacts. And then it's going to refresh here and it's going to say which views do you want to show. So just to keep things simple, I'll just say active contacts. And you can see here that I have the options to, should I allow them to create new records, view details, edit them, delete them. Just for this, I'll leave those all off. Additional settings here, enable entity permissions, enable search. I'll just leave those unchecked just so that I don't have to worry about entity permissions for now. But I'll do that, I'll save that. And then now that I've got this page here, I'm going to click the browse website and see what this page looks like now that I've added my entity list. So you can see here that I've got the view with the columns as configured in my model-driven app is now pulling the data from my CDS environment. Now, obviously, do you want to ever show a list of all the contacts in your CRM on the portal? Probably not, but just as a quick example, you can kind of see how that works. And as I said, minutes to get from there, from nothing to viewing all of this data. Now, the next thing we'll do is we'll create an entity form. So entity forms, what they do is they give you the ability to either, you can have read-only ones, you can use them to create records, and you can use them to edit records. So I'm just going to create one for inserts. So I'm just going to create another page here. Wait for it to load, and then you'll see that in the components, I'm going to have a form component in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add, click here, and I'm going to add the form component. So this form component, again, we give it a name, demo contact form. We select an entity. I'll find contact. And then I select, it's giving me a list of all the forms that I have on my, in my CDS instance. So I'll just select the profile web form. There's a link here where I can edit the form. I can select whether I want to insert, edit, or read only, and I'll just select insert. A number of settings about what to do when they successfully submit it, and some other options here for CAPTCHA. So I'll just get that saved. You can see that it's auto saving here at the bottom. And then I'm just going to say browse website and wait for this to load over there. Now again, this is a small subset of all the options that are available for entity forms and entity lists. Here you can see it's taken the form that I've created in my model-driven app and exposed it on the portal. Now the real power here is that when you start linking the entity lists and the entity forms together, you can have entity lists that point, when you click on one of the records, it opens up the entity forms. On your form, you can have subgrids, so then you have those records can point to other forms. You can have people editing records, people creating new records. So you can very quickly and easily create web applications using this framework. And if you're already familiar with building model-driven apps, that's half the work, is just creating the entities, creating the forms. This all works with custom entities. It works with the out-of-the-box entities as the general rule. So that's really what you're doing, is you're building the views and the forms in your model-driven apps, and then you're exposing it on the portal using entity lists and forms. So if I flip over to my model-driven app over here, just to give you a sense of, so I've been creating these things. This demo contact form was the one that I had just created. And if you remember, maybe there was 10 fields for us to deal with. When you actually get into the model-driven app, you can see here that the number of additional options here, it's almost a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of options in here on what you can do to these forms, so lots of capabilities. Same idea with the entity lists. There's as many options on the entity list as there is on the entity form. So lots of ways to extend it, lots of ways to customize it. So what you can do in the studio is just a kind of a small subset. All right, flipping back to the presentation here. I'm just going to follow a question here. So scenario, I have an AD group containing a list of external contacts who need access to the portal. Using the SDK, is it possible to create the contact records for these external users and assign the required web roles so that when these external users log in through Azure AD, they automatically see what areas they need to? So yes, that is possible. It requires you to become familiar with the external identity record. So you can create the contacts and then create the external identity records, which have the necessary Azure AD IDs. However, what I'd probably recommend is, instead of that, maybe use the invitation code model. What you do is you create the contacts in your CRM, and then you initiate an invitation code process, which will send them an email with a link that they click on, and then they sign into Azure Active Directory, and it will automatically associate them with the appropriate contact. So rather than getting into the details of setting up Azure AD properly for each user, just create the contacts, send them an invitation code, and then when they redeem that invitation code, they'll sign in with their Azure Active Directory, and it will link the contact and Azure AD together. All right. Okay, extensibility. So in addition to kind of the out-of-the-box entity list, entity forms, you can think of Power Apps portals as somewhat of a development platform as well. So you can build out things that are not possible with just entity forms and entity lists. So some of the technologies that you can use to do that are JavaScript. So there are a pretty big number of places that you can insert JavaScript on a portal. You can pretty much put a JavaScript on any page, and there's a lot of different options for JavaScript. So you can use JavaScript to modify how a page looks. You can add functionality, like on a entity form. You can add additional validation that may not be possible out of the box. Think about similar to how you on a model-driven app you can add extra validation. You can do similar things on Power Apps portals. So JavaScript is probably the main way that people are customizing their portals is by putting in custom JavaScript. There's also a technology called Liquid. Now, Liquid is a server-side templating language, which is great for reading and displaying data. So if you're looking to have a custom interface to display data, maybe display your data in a very unique way, You want to build an events portals that has a calendar. You want to, we've seen it used for, say, property management, and you want to build out this really nice interface for displaying properties. You can do that with Liquid. Liquid, you can query in fetch XML your data, and then use things like for loops, if statements, conditional statements like that to display the data in pretty much any way that you want. So Liquid is very powerful for displaying data and querying data from CDS. Unfortunately, it offers no create, update, or delete operations. So it's just for retrieving data, not for updating data. If you do need to update data, or you need to do something, kind of take it to the next level, there is the concept of what's known as a companion app. A companion app is a web service that you are responsible for hosting somewhere else, somewhere that's externally available, that you call from JavaScript on your portal. Since you control that web service, you can do anything like that you want in it. So you can make calls to CDS, you can make calls to other APIs. There's really no limit to what you can do in that companion app. And again, you call that companion app from JavaScript that's written directly on your portal. You can achieve single sign-on between your companion app and the portal, because the portal will issue you a token that you can pass to your companion app that can be validated, so that you know that you're receiving a request, you can know who the request is coming from. So you can do that in a secure way. So this companion app technique is very powerful. It means you can pretty much do anything you want on the portal. There's really not much you can't do if you're willing to build it out using a companion app. Now the good news is that what's coming in preview in June of this year are the web APIs for CRUD operations on CDS entities. So we've got a number of companion apps that we've built that are only being used to access CDS entities. Those could be replaced very soon with this web API. So essentially in JavaScript on your portal, you will be able to call an API to perform operations like create a record, update a record, delete a record, without going through any other external services. And of course, entity permissions will be enforced on that service. So it's a way that you can allow, you can update data directly in JavaScript without relying on a companion app. So I know I think there's some questions here, but I'll get to those at the end. I'll just get through the content, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Quickly, everyone's favorite topic here is licensing. So how does licensing work for portals? Basically, there's three types of users for licensing. Internal users, so those are users in your organization or the organization that owns the portal. Those are licensed like any of the other types of Power Apps. So whether it's Canvas or model-driven apps, you're either your $10 for kind of single app license, or your $40 unlimited app licenses. Your internal users require those types of licenses to access a portal, Power Apps portal. For people who are outside of your organization, they're kind of grouped into two categories. Anonymous users, so if they're not logging in, you basically pay per page view, and so that's $100 US per month for 100,000 page views a month. And then for external authenticated, so if people are logging in, you essentially pay every time they log in, except if they log in multiple times within a 24-hour period. That counts as one login. So think of it as like you log in, you can log in as many times as you want for 24 hours for one token. So each one of those login tokens is, you can buy 100 of them for $200, 1,000 logins for $1,000, or 5,000 logins for $3,500 US. So that's how the licensing works for portals. Back in the day with Dynamics 365 portals, you used to get a free instance with your, if you had a certain minimum number of Dynamics licenses. That's no longer the case. So there's no longer a per instance charge. So if your people want to use portals and they already have a Dynamics license or a Power Apps license, then portals can be free. So it's really there's no per portal license anymore. It also helps with, you can spin up a UAT, dev, test, those types of portals for very low costs. because you're going to probably have very few logins and very few page views on those. So, and finally, I'll just get through some useful resources. These are the quote unquote official resources. So the official Microsoft documentation. There is some portal content on Microsoft Learn. So if you want to go through those courses. The discussion forums, there's kind of two places you could go right now. There's the Power Apps discussion forums. I really encourage you to use the Power Apps discussion forums as opposed to the Dynamics 365. The portal product group actively monitors the Power Apps one. So if you have any, if you're looking for help, certainly go to the Power Apps discussion forums and look for some help there. And then there's also the ADX Studio community site still exists. It's a little bit dated, but to be honest, there's still still good information. So if you happen to come upon that during your if you're searching throughout the web, there's still some good information on the community site. In terms of community resources, as I mentioned, there's the online course by Nick Dolman. There's a number of people who have blogs that either focus exclusively on portals, or historically they've been had a lot of portal content, including Colin and Nick. Our Pit has a lot of stuff on portals. Both Megan Walker and Eliza Benitez historically have had a lot of portal stuff as well. So those are some great blogs to check out. If podcasts are your thing, there is the Refresh the Cache podcast, which I've recently been included in as a kind of a permanent host. So that's with Colin and Nick as well. And if YouTube videos are your thing, we've got my my Power Apps portals tips. So lots of different resources out there in the community for portals. So that's there's the Q&A. I just, before we get into the Q&A, because I know we're kind of getting near the end of the hour here, and I'm happy to kind of stay on and answer questions, but I just want to again say thank you to the team at MS Dynamics World for hosting us and supporting us on this endeavor. And let me see what other questions we've got here. So I see local is deprecated. What do people do if they have used local in the past? How do they simply migrate to something different, such as Azure AD B2C? So there is a document on the Microsoft website about migrating away from the older identity providers. So check out that. You can have more than, oh, Nikita, you can have more than one. We answered that. We've got, I haven't found any documentation. Oh, I guess I'm looking at old questions here. I must have scrolled down. Oh, here we go. Can sending the invitation code be automated through the SDK? Yeah, you can do it through like a workflow. There are some kind of custom workflow activities that get triggered during that process. So what you would do is, yeah, I would recommend you create the workflow and then trigger that workflow through the SDK. That's how I would approach that. I see Paul's already answered a question here about if we want to expose a list of KB articles, but we have accounts separated into two divisions, A and B, can we filter? Yeah, so with knowledge articles specifically, you can put them into kind of groups. The idea here is that you could have, like, say, premium members and non-premium members, and premium members only get access to certain knowledge articles. So we do have a Power Apps portals tip on that, on setting up the access control rules specifically for knowledge articles. There's something specific to that. And it looks like someone's saying that Eliza has a good blog post on triggering the invitation code via the SDK. So that's excellent. And then it says, when syncing data from Business Central, there does not appear to populate relationship fields on the entities. Without relationships, all the nice linking tech does not work. Any suggestions? Ooh. That's, yeah, without all the relationships, that's really the foundation for portals. So I'm not really too familiar with Business Central, other than kind of knowing what it is and what it's about. So unfortunately, I don't have any great advice other than, yeah, the relationships are pretty pretty essential. Otherwise, you're just looking at having like global access to all the records. So yeah, sorry, not a great answer on that. We got someone asking about multi-select. So multi-select is one of the fields right now that does not work out of the box. And so, sorry, Gary, I don't have any update on that. I don't know if, I'm not aware of that coming. So no update on when multi-select option sets will be available for use in portals. All right, it's now 2:01 for me. I think that's 4:01 on the East Coast. If there's any other questions, I've got a couple more minutes, but everyone, thank you for attending. If you have any other questions, you know how to get a hold of me on social media. The last thing here would just be when the next call is. So the next call will be the April 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So I think that's 4 weeks away or so. Nikita says, please vote for multi-select ideas in the portal, include new file and image type 2. Yeah, the new file and image types, I was actually asked about that this morning. So yeah, the best way to make your feedback known to the product team is through the ideas. We as MVPs do our best to advocate, but yeah, vote for ideas on the Power Apps, the Power Apps ideas area is the best way to tell the product team what it is that you actually want. So you can't complain that something doesn't exist if you haven't voted for the idea on there. So, all right. Well, I think I don't see any other questions. So I hope to see you or to join you guys all next month. I'll figure out what the next topic is and announce that usually within about a week. And send out an email to the people who have registered if you're interested in joining us next month. So thanks for attending, and everyone stay safe out there.